In the heart of the kingdom of Valdor, where mountains kissed the clouds and rivers ran like silver veins through the lush green forests, King Aelric the Wise reigned for over 3 decades. His kingdom was prosperous, his people loyal. But now, in his later years, the weight of the crown grew too heavy for his tired shoulders. The king had ruled with wisdom and fairness, but the time had come to choose a successor. His counselors had whispered for months, urging him to make a decision before it was too late. He knew that choosing a successor would not be an easy task. His children were as different as the sun, the moon, and the stars, each brilliant in their own way, yet each holding different destinies. On this day he summoned them to his chamber. The eldest was Prince Varian, 25 years old. Tall, dark-eyed, and handsome, Varian had the cunning of a wolf and the ambition of a hungry predator. He had spent years studying politics, manipulating courtiers, and playing the dangerous games of court intrigue. His ambition knew no bounds, and the desire for the throne burned in his heart like a fever. Varian's eyes were sharp, calculating, always looking for an advantage. He was a master of subtlety and guile, and his hunger for power was palpable. The youngest was Prince Aelric, just 16 years old but already celebrated across Valdor. He was the very image of honor, a knight who had proven himself in tournaments and battles despite his youth. His golden hair gleamed like sunlight, and his blue eyes shone with a quiet confidence that inspired respect and loyalty among the kingdom's soldiers and knights. The people adored him, the royal guard revered him, and his father saw in him a reflection of the noble spirit that had guided Valdor for generations. Between the two brothers stood Princess Eowyn, 18 years old, the jewel of Valdor, and considered the most beautiful girl in all the kingdom. Her long blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her bright green eyes sparkled with intelligence and kindness. Eowyn always admired Aelric for his pure heart and unwavering honor. To her, he was the true knight, the embodiment of everything good and noble. King Aelric, once powerful frame, now weary and frail. His crown sat heavily upon his head, but his eyes still gleamed with the sharpness of a mind that had ruled wisely for many years. His children stood before him, and the moment of decision had come. His voice, though soft with age, carried the weight of authority.
"My children,"
he began,
"the time has come for me to choose who will inherit the throne of Valdor. This decision weighs heavily upon my heart, but it must be made for the good of the kingdom."
Varian's eyes flickered with barely concealed eagerness, while Aelric stood still, calm, his hands clasped behind his back. Eowyn watched her father with a quiet intensity, already sensing the storm that was brewing. King Aelric's eyes lingered on each of them in turn, before settling on Aelric.
"Aelric,"
he said slowly,
"you are young, but you are wise beyond your years. You are honorable, brave, and respected by the people. You have shown me what it means to be a true knight, to serve with humility and strength. I see in you the future of Valdor."
The room grew silent. Varian's face twisted, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists at his sides. His breathing quickened as he realized the words his father had not yet spoken. Aelric's voice was steady, but filled with finality as he continued.
"It is you, Aelric, whom I have chosen to succeed me. You will be king."
Aelric blinked, clearly surprised, though he bowed his head humbly.
"Father, I am honored, but
"You will be king."
Aelric repeated firmly.
"Valdor needs a ruler who will lead with integrity, not ambition. The crown belongs to you."
At that moment, Varian could no longer contain his outrage.
"This is madness.
He spat, stepping forward with fury in his eyes.
You choose him? A boy? You choose him over me, your firstborn, the rightful heir?
His voice dripped with venom.
I have dedicated my life to preparing for this moment, to understanding the intricacies of power, and you would give it all to him?
King Aelric did not waver.
It is not the oldest who should inherit Varian. It is the one who will best serve the kingdom.
Serve the kingdom?
Varian sneered.
You mean to deny me what is mine because I understand power better than Aelric ever will. He is naive, too soft-hearted to survive the wolves of court. He will be eaten alive.
There is more to ruling than cunning, Varian.
The king replied, his voice stern.
Aelric has the heart of a king. You have the heart of a tyrant.
The insult stung and Varian's face contorted with fury. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed from the chamber, the door slamming behind him with a deafening crash. Silence filled the room, thick and tense. King Aelric turned to Aelric, his eyes softening.
I am proud of you, my son. Never let the darkness of power consume you.
Aelric stepped forward, kneeling beside his father's chair, and embraced him.
I will honor you, Father. I will rule as you have taught me, with wisdom and honor.
Eowyn watched, her heart filled with both pride and fear. She loved Aelric deeply, knowing that his heart was pure and noble. She had always seen him as the true knight, but she also knew that the path ahead would not be easy. Varian's fury had ignited something dangerous, something that could threaten the peace of the entire kingdom. As the king rested his hand on his youngest son's shoulder, Aelwyn stepped forward, placing her hand gently on Aelric's arm.
You will be a great king,
she said softly, her voice filled with affection.
I will stand by your side. Always.
Aelric smiled at his sister, knowing that her support meant the world to him. But in the back of his mind, a shadow lingered, a shadow in the shape of Varian's rage, and the knowledge that the battle for the throne of Valdor was far from over. Prince Varian raced through the dimly lit corridors of Valdor's majestic castle, his mind a cauldron of rage. His father's words echoed in his head, a cruel reminder that his life's ambitions had been crushed in an instant. Aelric, the boy prince, had been named heir, and the thought of his younger brother sitting on the throne that should have been his made his blood boil. He could barely keep himself from tearing at the tapestries as he passed them, his fury barely contained behind his clenched jaw and white-knuckled fists. He turned to the guard at the door in anger.
Send for them now.
Reaching his chambers, Varian threw open the heavy oak doors and entered, breathing heavily. The room was dark, save for the flickering of a single candle, casting long shadows across the stone walls. He stood for a moment, staring into the fire as if searching for answers. A few moments later, the door creaked and two figures entered, both shrouded in shadow. The first was Brynor, a man the same age as Varian and his most trusted man. Brynor was as cunning as the prince himself, always calculating, always thinking 3 steps ahead. His narrow face was framed by short dark hair, and his sharp brown eyes missed nothing. He smirked constantly, as if he were always on the verge of some cruel joke. The second was Edrin, a few years younger, about 22. Though he was intelligent and capable, Edrin had always been more hesitant, lacking the bold ruthlessness that distinguished Varian and Brynor. He had fair hair and soft features that belied his cunning nature, but today his face was tense. Varian did not wait for pleasantries. He turned to face them, his voice a thunderclap in the silence.
My father,
he spat,
made his choice?
Brynor raised an eyebrow, already suspecting the worst.
And?
Aelric.
Varian growled, his lips curling in disdain.
He chose Aelric as his successor.
Aetron's mouth dropped open slightly in disbelief, and Valron's smirk turned into a tense grimace. The room fell silent, the tension so palpable it could have been cut with a blade. The two advisors exchanged glances, trying to gauge the gravity of the situation. Finally, Brenor spoke, his voice low and dangerous.
We need to do something now.
Varian's jaw twitched, his eyes filling with a cold fire.
We will think of something,
he hissed, pacing back and forth like a caged animal.
I will not let my brother take what is rightfully mine.
Brenor watched him for a moment, then his eyes narrowed as an idea began to form. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper.
We could kill him.
Varian paused, staring at his advisor as if he had lost his mind.
Are you mad?
Brenor's expression remained calm, though there was a glint in his eyes.
What other choice do you have, my prince? If your father names Aelric his successor at the council in a few days, it will be too late. The court will rally to him, the knights will swear fealty, and you will be forever in the shadows. You know that.
Aedron shifted uncomfortably next to him, but Brenor continued, his voice even and persuasive.
You want to be king, do you? The time for pleasantries is past. You must act.
Varian's thoughts raced, torn between the madness of the proposal and the cold logic behind it. The thought of killing his own father made him feel sick for a moment. But then he pictured Aelric on the throne, wearing the crown that should have been his. He pictured himself kneeling before the younger boy, powerless. The rage inside him flared again, blinding him to everything else. He turned to Brenor.
Very well, but who will do it?
Brenor's eyes flashed as he glanced at Edrin, standing awkwardly by the door.
I think he is.
Edrin's face went pale, his eyes wide with horror.
What? No, I don't.
Before he could finish, Varian exploded in rage. He lunged at Edrin, his hand flying to the dagger at his belt. In an instant, he had the blade pressed to Edrin's throat, his eyes blazing with rage.
Then I will kill you, right here, right now.
Varian's voice was venomous, his grip on the dagger tightening. Edrin's breath was short, his eyes terrified.
Please, Varian, I can't.
Varian pressed the blade harder against his skin, just enough for Edrin to feel the sharp bite of the metal.
You can.
Varian growled.
Or you will die. Choose.
Edrin's throat tightened, the pulse in his neck pounding beneath the blade of the dagger. His shaking hands were raised in surrender, his voice barely audible.
Okay, I will do it. I will do it.
Varian lowered the dagger slowly, a satisfied smirk curling his lips. He took Edrin's hand and placed the dagger in it, his voice quiet and cold as ice.
Tonight, the king dies tonight, and you will do it.
Edrin's hands shook as he held the weapon, his face pale and tense. Brenor watched, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
The crown will be yours, Varian.
Brenor said smoothly.
And when the king is gone, none will dispute your claim.
Varian's eyes glittered with dark triumph as he turned to the window, looking out over the moonlit castle grounds.
Tomorrow,
he whispered under his breath,
I will be king.
With trembling hands, Edron hid the dagger the prince had given him in his palm, and they went to their rooms. The moon hung high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows over the silent halls of Valdor's castle. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound to be heard was the faint, muffled footsteps of Adrian as he moved through the darkness, heart pounding in his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his hands trembled uncontrollably as he clutched the dagger Varian had forced into his grip earlier that night. What am I doing? Adrian's mind raced, the weight of his task crushing him. He had no stomach for murder, no thirst for blood, but Varian had given him no choice. It was either the king or himself. He found himself standing outside the king's chamber, his body shaking with indecision. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his mouth felt dry. His fingers gripped the dagger's hilt so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His heart beat wildly in his chest, loud enough, it seemed, to wake the entire castle.
I can't do this. I can't.
But before he could retreat, the memory of Varian's blade at his throat flashed before his eyes. He had no choice. Gritting his teeth, he opened the door as quietly as he could and slipped inside. King Aelric lay in his bed, the light of a single candle casting soft, flickering shadows across his aged face. The king looked so frail, so vulnerable, as if the weight of the kingdom had drained the last of his strength. His breathing was slow, steady, the sound of peaceful slumber. Edrin stood at the foot of the bed, frozen. He tried to move, tried to raise the dagger, but his hand wouldn't obey. His mind screamed at him to act, but his body was paralyzed by fear. Seconds felt like hours as he fidgeted in the darkness, his breath shaky. Suddenly the king stirred. Eldric's eyes fluttered open, sensing a presence in the room. His gaze landed on Edrin, who stood like a statue, his heart caught in his throat. For a moment the old king squinted, confused, trying to make sense of the shadowy figure before him.
Who's there?
Eldric's voice was groggy, heavy with sleep. Panic surged through Edrin's veins. In a blind rush, he lunged forward, aiming the dagger at the king's chest. But the king, though weak, reacted swiftly. Aelric grabbed Edrin's wrist with surprising strength, his eyes wide with shock.
What are you doing?
The king gasped, struggling to keep the blade away from his chest. A desperate, frenzied struggle ensued. Edrin, his heart pounding in terror, tried to break free, but the king's grip was firm, stronger than he expected for a man of Eldric's age. The dagger trembled between them, inches away from piercing the king's heart. Sweat dripped down Edrin's face, and his breathing grew ragged. The king's strength, however, was failing fast. His arms trembled with the effort, and his breaths became labored. Edrin, panicking, managed to wrench his hand free from the king's grip. Without thinking, in the madness of the moment, he drove the dagger into Eldric's neck. The king gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain. Blood spurted from the wound, warm and thick, soaking the bedclothes. Edrin stumbled back, horrified at what he had done. Aelric clutched at his neck, choking, gurgling, his body thrashing weakly as life ebbed away. Edrin stood frozen for a moment, paralyzed by fear and guilt. But the sound of the king's choking, desperate wheezes snapped him back to reality. He had to run. He had to get out. Without a second thought, Edrin bolted from the room, the bloody dagger still clutched in his hand. He raced through the corridors, his footsteps echoing like a death knell in the silence of the night. His breath came in ragged gasps as he reached his chambers, slamming the door behind him. The dagger fell from his trembling hands onto the bed, his clothes soaked with blood. But it was too late. The king's dying gasps had raised the alarm. A royal guard, hearing the commotion, had rushed into the king's chamber, finding Aelric barely conscious, his hands still gripping his bloody throat. The guard knelt by the king's side, shouting for help. But the king's voice was barely a whisper, the words unintelligible as blood filled his mouth. Moments later, more guards arrived, but Aelric had already slipped into unconsciousness. The alarm spread through the castle like wildfire. Torches flared in the night and shouts filled the air as the guards began searching the corridors for the intruder. Princess Elowen, her heart pounding with dread, ran into her father's room, her hair loose and disheveled from sleep. The royal physician was already there, his face grim as he pressed cloths to the king's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. But the damage was too great. Moments later, Prince Aelric arrived, breathless and wide-eyed with panic. He rushed to his father's side, kneeling beside the bed.
Father!
Aelric cried, but the king did not respond. The physician shook his head gravely. The king had lost too much blood, and by morning he was dead. As dawn broke, Prince Varian hurried through the castle, his mind racing. He reached Edrin's chambers and threw open the door, finding the young man sitting on the floor, his face pale and his hands stained with blood. On the bed lay the bloodied dagger, and Edrin's clothes were soaked through with crimson.
You idiot!
Varian hissed, his voice trembling with rage. He stormed toward Edrin and grabbed him by the collar, hauling him to his feet.
Change your clothes now!
Adrian's eyes were wide with terror, his body shaking uncontrollably.
It just happened.
He stammered. Varian slapped him hard across the face.
Pull yourself together. If anyone finds you like this, we're both dead.
At that moment, Brynor burst into the room. He took one look at the bloody mess and immediately understood the situation.
Help him change.
Varian snapped, shoving Edrin toward Brynor.
I'll hide the dagger for now and find out what's happening.
Brynor nodded and hurried to help Edrin out of his blood-stained clothes, while Varian grabbed the dagger, wrapping it in cloth to conceal it. He slipped out of the room, moving swiftly down the corridor. Just as Varian reached the end of the hallway, a royal guard approached him, his face grim.
Prince Varian, the council has gathered in the throne room. They are waiting for you.
Varian's heart pounded in his chest. With a curt nod, Varian followed the guard, his mind already racing with new schemes, plotting his next move. The Grand Council chamber of Brynor was draped in mourning, the banners of the kingdom hanging limp and the air thick with grief. As Prince Varian entered the hall, all eyes turned toward him. His posture was regal, his face composed, betraying nothing of the chaos that had consumed the night before. Beside him stood Lord Orlan, a seasoned advisor, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes sharp as ever. He was one of the king's most trusted men, and had always maintained a firm loyalty to Varian.
Ah, excellent.
Lord Orlan said, his voice smooth, carrying through the hall.
We were waiting only for you, Your Highness.
Varian's gaze swept over the room. At the large polished oak table sat his younger siblings, Prince Aelric and Princess Elowen. Aelric's face was a mixture of grief and frustration, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Elowen, her beauty now shadowed by sorrow, looked at Varian with wary eyes, her sadness tempered by suspicion. Lord Orlan wasted no time.
As you know, the king, may his soul rest in peace, has passed away.
His voice softened for a moment, respectful of the loss.
According to the law, we must choose a new king. And as you, Prince Varian, are the eldest son, the throne is your rightful inheritance.
The words had barely left Orlan's lips when Aelric shot up from his chair, his voice sharp with indignation.
But my father appointed me his heir.
His face flushed with anger, and his eyes burned with accusation as they bore into Varian. The council members exchanged confused looks, and Orlan raised an eyebrow in surprise.
Appointed you heir?
He said slowly.
This is the first we have heard of it.
Princess Aelric, who had remained silent until now, spoke up, her voice cold and cutting.
It's true. Our father named Aelric his successor. You all know how close they were.
The tension in the room thickened, a heavy silence falling over the council members as they turned their gazes to Varian. Lord Orland turned as well, his expression curious.
Is this true, Your Highness? Did the king truly name your younger brother as his heir?
Varian's face was a mask of calm, though inside he could feel the flames of rage licking at the edges of his composure. Aelric's outburst, Eloin's accusations, it all chipped away at the carefully constructed narrative he had planned. But he had to keep his mask on. He could not let them see his fury, his panic. His voice when he spoke was smooth as silk.
I have heard nothing of the sort.
Varian replied evenly.
If my father had changed his mind about the succession, I would have been informed, as his eldest son and the natural heir.
You liar!
Aelric roared, his voice echoing through the hall. His fists clenched at his sides, his body trembling with barely contained rage.
You know exactly what he said. You were there.
Varian kept his eyes locked on his brother, his expression never faltering.
I am sorry, Aelric, but you are mistaken. You and my sister have always been against me, and now that our father has died, you have plotted against me.
For a brief moment, Varian thought Aelric might lunge at him, but his younger brother restrained himself, though just barely. His breathing was ragged, and his fury was palpable. Aelric, too, looked at Varian with fierce disdain, her lips pressed into a tight line. Lord Orland cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the room back to him.
Simple statements are not enough to change the law,
he said firmly, though his tone was calm.
We have no formal declaration from the king, no witness testimony. According to the laws of Valdor, Prince Varian, as the eldest son, is the rightful heir. He will take his place as king.
Aelric's fists clenched, his voice cracking with emotion.
This is wrong? You know this is wrong?
Aelric rose from her seat, her face pale but determined.
I will not leave it this way. The wishes of our father are being disregarded.
But the council members remained silent, their expressions a mixture of duty and discomfort. They too had their doubts, but without solid proof, they could not challenge the succession. Lord Orland turned to Varian once more.
The law is clear, and the council will abide by it.
Varian inclined his head slightly, a look of solemnity crossing his face as he clasped his hands behind his back.
Thank you. It is the greatest honor to succeed my father and Ledvald or into a new era.
Aelric and Aelric could stand it no longer. They turned and left the hall together, their steps quick and angry, the heavy doors closing behind them with a loud thud. As soon as they were gone, Varian allowed a small, cruel smile to tug at the corners of his lips. He turned to Lord Orland, his voice cold and mocking.
When, then, shall my appointment be?
Orland nodded.
Tomorrow at dawn, we will begin the ceremony. By midday, you will be crowned king.
Varian's smile widened.
Well then,
he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction.
Until tomorrow.
With that, he turned and left the hall, his heart filled with dark triumph. Tomorrow the throne would be his. The crown would rest on his head, and his brother and sister's protests would mean nothing. As Prince Varian strode down the dimly lit corridor after leaving the council chamber, he spotted Brynor waiting for him, his lean figure leaning casually against one of the stone pillars. Brynor straightened as Varian approached, his eyes glinting with curiosity.
How did it go?
Brynor asked in a low voice, his tone calm but full of anticipation. Varian's lips curved into a sly smile.
Everything went perfectly.
He replied, his voice brimming with satisfaction.
The council has decided tomorrow. I will be crowned king.
Preener's face broke into a grin, but Varian's smile quickly faded as he lowered his voice and asked,
What of Edran? I noticed he looked unsettled.
Preener's expression darkened.
He's a mess, Varian. The boy is trembling at shadows. He didn't sleep last night, and he keeps looking over his shoulder as if he expects the ghosts of the king to chase him down the halls.
Varian frowned, his eyes narrowing.
Keep a close watch on him. Make sure he doesn't say anything to anyone. If he even thinks about speaking out.
I'll handle it.
Preenor assured him, cutting him off.
He won't be a problem.
Varian nodded, his face returning to its cold, confident calm.
Good. We can't afford any loose ends. Now prepare for tomorrow. Everything must go smoothly.
Preenor bowed his head slightly, his expression serious.
As you command, my king.
The next morning, the great courtyard of Valdor Castle was transformed into a scene of solemn grandeur. The banners of the kingdom fluttered proudly in the wind, and the citizens of Valdor filled the streets to witness the coronation of their new ruler. Nobles from all over the land had gathered in the great hall of the castle, where the throne, now draped in the royal red and gold, awaited its new owner. Prince Varian, dressed in royal robes of crimson and gold embroidery, stood before the council and the most honored nobles of the kingdom. His face was expressionless, but his heart pounded with anticipation. The royal crown, glittering with jewels and the weight of centuries of kings, rested on a velvet cushion, waiting to be placed upon his brow. The high priest, an elderly man with a silver beard, stepped forward with the crown in his hands.
By the laws of the land and the will of the people,
the priest began, his voice echoing through the hall.
We now crown Varian, eldest son of King Aelric, as the rightful ruler of Valdor. May he lead us with wisdom, strength, and justice.
With that, the crown was lowered onto Varian's head. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd, followed by applause, though it seemed muted, tinged with grief for the king's death. Varian lifted his chin, feeling the weight of the crown settle on his forehead. This was the moment he had fought for, the culmination of years of intrigue and ambition. He was now the king of Valdor. A few days had passed since the coronation, and Varian had wasted no time in consolidating his power. Standing before the court in the throne room, he made a shocking revelation.
It pains me to say this.
Varian began, his voice dark, though his eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction.
But I have begun an investigation into the murder of our beloved king and my father, and we have uncovered disturbing evidence.
The courtiers murmured, their eyes wide with shock.
A bloody dagger was found hidden under the bed of none other than my brother, Prince Aelric.
Varian's voice rang out clearly, and the room fell silent in disbelief.
For the sake of justice and peace, I must with a heavy heart order his immediate arrest.
At that very moment, Prince Aelric was preparing for the tournament that had been announced in honor of Varian's coronation. He was tightening the straps on his armor when the doors to the preparation chamber swung open and several of the king's guards entered, led by Sir Roderick, the captain of the guard, a veteran of many battles, a sturdy man known for his fierce loyalty and honor. Behind him stood Garin, the senior guard, a stern man with a scar running down his cheek. Garin spoke first.
Prince Aelric,
Garin said, his voice quiet but firm.
You are under arrest for the murder of your father, King Aelric.
Aelric froze, his eyes narrowing as he straightened. Around him, his trusted companions, the knights and guardsmen who served with him in the king's guard, exchanged confused and angry glances. The air in the room grew tense with tension as more guards began to surround him.
This is madness.
Aelric snapped, his voice thick with indignation.
I would never harm my father. This is nothing but a lie.
Sir Roderick stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern.
Garin,
He said, his voice calm but commanding.
this accusation is absurd. Prince Aelric is a man of honor, and I will not have him treated as a common criminal.
The tension in the room grew. Aelric's companions stirred, their hands instinctively reaching for their swords. The guards who had come to arrest him began to disperse cautiously, sensing the threat of violence. Garin raised his hand, his voice even but serious.
There is no need to bring this to bloodshed, Sir Roderick. If Prince Aelric is truly innocent, he will have a chance to prove it before the court. But if we fight here and now, we risk starting a civil war. Is this what you wish?
Roderick hesitated, his hand on the hilt of his sword. The knights behind Aelric tensed, their devotion to the prince evident in their hardened gazes. Aelric Fierce raised his hand, stopping his men from drawing their blades.
We will not shed blood today,
he said, his voice firm. He turned to Garin.
I will come with you. I will face all the lies that have been thrown against me.
Garin let out a quiet sigh of relief.
Thank you, my prince. You will be treated with respect.
He did not bind Aelric's hands, a silent gesture of trust in the honor of the accused prince. Aelric cast one last glance at Sir Roderick, who nodded gravely, silently vowing to get to the bottom of this betrayal. The guards escorted Prince Aelric through the great halls of the castle, leading him to the lower halls where he would await his trial. Behind them, whispers of betrayal and justice spread like wildfire through the halls of Valdor as the kingdom stood on the brink of even greater conflict.
Tables circle in the night, feasts and jousts a lively sight, tales of dragons taking flight, kings and queens on golden thrones, wizards casting spells with toes, minstrels drum on strings of bone, legends carving ancient stones, sing of courage, fierce and true, battles won for me and you. Skies of blue, heroes rise from morning. Flare with eyes of green, castle walls and moats between. Laughter echoes soft and clean in